All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we're unpacking what I like to call the chemist's toolkit. We're going to take a journey, starting all the way down at the micro level of single molecules and zoom all the way out to predicting actual, real-world yields in the lab. We're basically taking all that dense alphabet soup of chemistry math and turning it into a clear, easy-to-use framework. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off by decoding chemical formulas. Then we'll balance some chemical equations. After that, we'll dive into the science of solutions, followed by some advanced solution metrics. And finally, we'll hit the wall with real-world reaction limits.
Let's get started with Section 1, decoding chemical formulas at the micro level.
You know, finding an empirical formula is kind of like stripping a molecule down to its most basic blueprint. It's the simplest atomic ratio. So imagine a lab analysis tells you an organic compound is exactly 20% carbon, 6.7% hydrogen, 46.67% nitrogen, and 26.63% oxygen. At first glance, that just sounds like a bunch of random numbers, but there's a really beautiful structured logic hiding in there. We take each percentage and divide it by the element's atomic mass to get an atomic ratio. Then, we take all of those answers and divide them by the smallest number we just found. In this case, that's 1.66. Why do we do this? To find the simplest whole numbers. And just like that, the math spits out a perfect 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 ratio. Our molecular mystery is solved, and the empirical formula is perfectly revealed as CH4N2O. Pretty cool, right?
Moving on to Section 2, balancing the chemical equation, finding the perfect recipe.
Now, in stoichiometry, the law of conservation of mass is basically the golden rule. Simply put, what goes in must come out. Nothing vanishes. Let's look at the combustion of butane using a strict 5-step logical process. Some folks call it the hit and trial method, but it's really just a systematic puzzle. Step 1, you write out the basic skeleton of the reactants and products. Then, you just work through the elements one by one. Step 2, you balance the carbon atoms. Step 3, handle the hydrogen. Step 4 is oxygen, and fair warning, this sometimes requires using fractions that you'll have to multiply out later. Finally, Step 5, you verify. So for our butane example, you check to make absolutely sure you have exactly 8 carbons, 20 hydrogens, and 26 oxygens on both the left and the right sides of the equation. It's a perfect mathematical scale. Everything has to balance.
Let's transition over to Section 3, the science of solutions, where we start mixing things up.
Okay, so in the actual lab, we're usually mixing chemicals into liquid solutions. And the absolute most common unit we use to measure concentration is molarity, which is represented by a big capital M. By definition, it's just the number of moles of your chemical, your solute, dissolved in exactly 1 liter of the total solution. It's a beautifully simple volume-based calculation. But wait a second. There's a hidden and pretty major flaw here. Think about this practical lab problem for a second. What happens to our perfectly measured molarity if the temperature in the laboratory changes and the liquid volume naturally expands? Here's the catch. Because liquid volume literally fluctuates with temperature, a solution's molarity actually changes slightly if the room gets hotter or colder. And, that is not great for precise science. Enter our hero, molality, with an L. Instead of dividing your moles by liters of volume, molality divides them by the mass of the solvent in kilograms. Since a kilogram of water weighs exactly a kilogram whether it's freezing cold or boiling hot, molality is entirely temperature independent. It's a rock-solid metric when conditions are changing. All right, let's look at Section 4, Advanced Solution Metrics, our specialized lab tools. Because chemistry is complex, knowing just moles per liter isn't always enough. For specialized situations, like acid-base or redox reactions, we use something called normality. Think of it this way. Instead of asking how many whole molecules are in here, normality asks how many active reactive pieces are in here. For an acid, it's all about the number of replaceable hydrogen ions. For a base, it's the hydroxide ions. It's essentially a clever shortcut. It lets chemists match up the actual reacting power of 2 different liquids drop for drop without getting completely bogged down in the math. Another super useful metric is the mole fraction. It's exactly what it sounds like, the ratio of the moles of one specific ingredient compared to the total moles of everything mixed in the beaker. The best part? If you calculate the mole fraction for every single ingredient in your mixture and add them all up, they will always perfectly equal exactly 1. Every single time. It's just a really clean way to understand the true proportions of your mixture. Now, on the flip side, what if you have an incredibly tiny amount of something mixed into a massive amount of liquid? That's where parts per million, or ppm, comes in handy. You literally take the mass of your solute, divide it by the mass of the whole solution, and multiply it by 1,000,000. If you've ever looked at a local water report detailing the hardness of your tap water, which is usually just tiny traces of calcium and magnesium, you'll see it measured in ppm.
To see just how specific these metrics can get, take a look at oleum. You might run into textbook labels that say things like 109% H2SO4. I know, it sounds literally impossible to have more than 100% of something, right? But this is actually a highly specialized industry standard. It's based on how much water the free SO3 gas in the mixture can combine with. It's all about matching the specific mathematical tool to the specific real-world application.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Real-World Reaction Limits, or hitting the wall.
So we've spent a lot of time today on perfect, theoretical equations. But real-world reactions rarely feature a perfect one-to-one swap. To understand this, let's think about building bicycles. Imagine you're working at a factory. You have 10 bike frames, and you have 14 wheels. How many complete bicycles can you build? Well, each bike needs 2 wheels, obviously. So those 14 wheels will only get you 7 completed bikes. You still have 3 frames just sitting there left over. But you have to stop building. Why? Because your production is entirely limited by the number of wheels.
In chemistry, those wheels are exactly what we call the limiting reagent. It is the reactant that gets consumed completely first. Just like our bike wheels, the limiting reagent dictates the absolute maximum amount of product you can form. And it leaves the other chemicals just sitting there in the beaker in excess, totally unreacted. For example, if you mix 10 grams of calcium carbonate with 10 grams of hydrochloric acid, they don't both magically disappear at the same time. Based on their molar masses, those 10 grams of calcium carbonate will run out first. It is the limiting reagent, and it firmly caps the exact amount of CO2 gas that can bubble out of that reaction.
And here's the kicker. Even when you calculate your limiting reagent perfectly, reality always throws a curveball. Let's say you're combining magnesium and sulfur to make magnesium sulfide. Perfect math on a whiteboard dictates you should get exactly 56 grams. But in an actual experiment, you might only yield, say, 50 grams. That gives us a percent yield of 89.28%. Why the gap? Well, because of side reactions, imperfect lab conditions, or maybe you just lost a little bit of powder on the side of the beaker. The truth is, in real chemistry, you almost never get 100%.
And that perfectly wraps up our journey today. We've gone all the way from decoding microscopic atomic ratios to balancing perfect equations, down to measuring the slightly messy, less than perfect yields of the actual real world. So, I want to leave you with this question to ponder. In a world filled with perfect mathematical equations on the whiteboard, how will you use this chemist toolkit to account for the imperfect reality of your very next experiment? Thanks so much for joining me to figure it all out. Keep exploring, and as always, keep questioning the science around you.